Hey group, okay, we're going to go ahead and get started back with homework 2 question. We're going to start with question 2. Question 1 was submitted on the previous recording. For question 2, we're going to use the transshipment template in the module under module 2, prescriptive analytics, the Excel spreadsheet transshipment template. And for this template, the transshipment tab is the only one that we're interested in. These other two you can delete when you're ready to submit your assignment. Like the first question though, we're going to start with our linear programming formulation. And this one, as a transshipment question, is dealing with goods produced at plants that are shipped to a warehouse, stored in the warehouse, and then shipped from the warehouse to retail outlets based on capacity of our warehouses and the demand in our retail outlets. The first part of this question asks for a graph that shows the company's distribution network, showing the supply nodes, transshipment nodes, and demand nodes. So the first part of this question, the easiest thing is just to create a diagram. So we're going to start with our plants. And I just did that by inserting a shape. So insert shapes, and I just use circles for my plants. We're going to end up with 2 shapes for our plants, 2 shapes for our warehouses, and then 3 shapes for our retail outlets. So we start with our plants. I'm going to use squares for our warehouse. And having different shapes makes it easier to distinguish between the two. Once you draw the shape once, you can just highlight the shape, copy it, and paste to get a second shape. And then we'll insert a triangle for our retail outlets. And there's no secret for these shapes. These are just the 3 that I selected. You can use any 3 shapes that you want. You can use the same shape for all 3 that are different colors, or have different labels, just something to visually show the difference between our 3 facilities. So this first shape is going to be plant 1. Let's see. Second shape is going to be plant 2. And so if you start typing and can't see the text, you can just go up to Word Art Styles and select the first icon. Or as it's highlighted, just change the color. Once you have your icons for your different units, we need to show our connections. And we're going to do this with just arrows. So plant 1 will distribute to warehouse 1. And plant 1 will also distribute to warehouse, oh, let's change this to warehouse 2. So I'm just inserting arrows. Plant 2 to warehouse 1. Plant 2 to warehouse 2. And then our warehouses to retail outlets, warehouse 1 to retail outlet 1. Warehouse 1 to retail outlet 2. Warehouse 1 to retail outlet 3. And warehouse 2, same way. If it's easier for you to draw these out by hand, it's absolutely fine to do it that way. You don't have to use Word. This is just the format that you're trying to get to display your distribution network. So this is our distribution network. The question says to identify the supply nodes, transshipment nodes, and demand nodes. Our plants are our supply nodes. Our warehouses are transshipment nodes. And our retail outlets are demand nodes. And supply, transshipment, and demand, the names just describe what they do. The plants supply the product. Transshipment node is a storage facility that is the intermediary between the supply and the demand. And our retail outlets are the demand nodes. They're the units that demand our final products. Then it says to write down the ARC costs and capacities. So this can be just a simple text box. Let's see. And I'm going to do this, the layout options. We'll put this one so that's in front of text. That way it won't wrap. We can put it wherever we want. And we need to write down the ARC cost and capacity. So our first ARC is plant 1 to warehouse 1. Our unit shipping cost is $425. And our capacity is 125 units. Does everybody see where I got that information from the charts from the homework assignment?
Yes.
So once you have one created, if you copy it and paste, then all you have to do is update the numbers inside. Plant 1 to warehouse 2 has a shipping cost of $560 and a capacity of 150 units. So our third is plant 2 to warehouse 1. That's $510 and 175 units. And then plant 2 to warehouse 2. Is $600 and 200 units. And we can put the output with the plants. So plant 1 can output 200 units. Plant 2 can output 300 units. So you see that as you build, sometimes you have to make slight adjustments, but you just need to make sure that you get all of the information together on your final product. So we did our output requirements. We can do our demand requirements for our retail outlets the same way. And then the last step is the ARC costs for warehouse to retail outlet. And these do not have, Dr. Adevar has removed the capacity for these. So all we have to worry about here is cost. So everybody see what I'm doing with these?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
So this is the solution for part A of question 2. Shows the distribution network, supply, transshipment, and demand nodes, arc costs, and capacities. Now that we have this diagram, it's going to be easier to formulate our linear programming equations. The first thing that we're going to look at is the objective function. So we'll go back to our layout. So the objective function for this one says the management wants to determine a distribution plan that will minimize the total shipping cost. So our objective function is to minimize. And our shipping costs are from plants to warehouses and from warehouses to retail outlets. So our first shipping cost is $425 from plant 1 to warehouse 1, plus $560 from plant 1 to warehouse 2, plus $510 from plant 1 to, or excuse me, plant 2 to warehouse 1, plus $600 for plant 2 to warehouse 2. And then we move from warehouse to retail outlet, $470 from warehouse 1 to retail outlet 1. $500 for warehouse 1 to retail outlet 2, $450 from warehouse 1 to retail outlet 3, and repeat for warehouse 2. So did everybody see how we came up with the objective function? Does anybody have any questions about the objective function for this question? All right, so who can tell me what constraints we have? First constraint that we have is our related to our plants. It's how much can we produce from each plant? So can anyone tell me what the first plant constraint is?
Yeah, plant 1 to your warehouse capacity 125, right?
So that's a shipping capacity constraint. That absolutely is true.
Oh, you have an output, total output. Is that your?
Yep.
So from your plant 1, you have a total output of 200.
Right. So what comes out of plant 1? Where does plant 1 ship to?
Plant 1.
Warehouse 1 and 2.
That's right. So plant 1 to warehouse 1 plus plant 1 to warehouse 2 is constrained by 200 output.
I'm sorry, Trent. I'm just joining because I didn't get an email, an updated email. Have you been going for a while now?
I have, Emma, and this one is recorded, so you'll be able to go back to the recording to catch up. I didn't send an extra email. I have updated the announcement, but the rest of this is recorded in that. And if you have any questions to catch up, I can come back with you later on.
Okay, that's fine. Are you still? What number are you on now?
We're still on question 2. We're just doing the limit or linear programming formulation.
Thank you.
Yep. So the first thing that we did was draw the distribution network, and I'll just quickly show you, but you can watch the recording to get back to how we did that distribution network. Basically just is a diagram showing our supply, transshipment, and demand nodes with our ARC costs and capacities for each of our facilities.
Thank you.
So now we're on the constraints. Our first constraint was the output from plant 1. Our second constraint is the output for plant 2. So plant 2 to warehouse 1 plus plant 2 to warehouse 2. And that has a 300 unit capacity. All right, so then,
Frank, can I just make
Yes.
sure I'm understanding this correctly? So although plant 1 can have a capacity of 125 at warehouse 1 and 150 at warehouse 2, which is 275, it still only has a constraint of 200 where it can only put out 200 units. Am I?
that's right. You've got 2 constraints. You've got a shipping capacity constraint and an output constraint. So you can only output 200 units, but you can't ship 200 units to either of the facilities. You can only ship 125 units to warehouse 1 and 150 units to warehouse 2.
Got it. Thank
Is
you.
our second set of capacities is the shipping capacity, where plant 1 to warehouse 1 is less than or equal to 125, and plant 1 to warehouse 2 is less than or equal to 150. And then now we've got the same type of capacity for plant 2. Plant 2 to warehouse 1 is 175, and plant 2 to warehouse 2 is 200. So does everybody see those 4 shipping capacities and how the shipping capacity corresponds to the output?
Yes.
So then our final set of constraints is our demand. So our demand for retail outlet 1 is 150. And where does retail outlet 1 receive its supply?
Warehouse
one and
1. 2.
That's right, warehouse 1 and 2. So warehouse 1 to retail outlet 1 plus warehouse 2 to retail outlet 1 has a demand of 150. And then now we go through for the other retail outlets. So there are our constraints. We have capacity constraints for our output for each of our 2 plants, shipping capacity from plant to warehouse, and then demand at our retail outlets that's provided from each warehouse. So our notation, P is plants, W is warehouse, RO retail outlets. So PNWN is the units shipped from plant N. Oh, let's do to warehouse M. And then warehouse M to RO J is units shipped from warehouse to retail outlet. And then, so N is, actually, that's going to be our variable constraints. So N is 1 or 2. M is 1 or 2. And J is 1, 2, or 3. And our shipments from plants to warehouses and from warehouses to retail outlets are non-negative. So, and if you'll look at the notation that is provided in question 3, let's see if I, all right. So here in question 3, you see this I, it kind of looks like an EV1 K, K. So that symbol just means belongs to the set. That symbol is available in Word, but just for our purposes, don't worry about it. What we did as N equals 1, 2 is just another way of saying that same notation. So that I'm just showing you how the notation that we've just created corresponds to what you're going to see in the next question. So once we have our linear programming function written out, now we can transfer this to our transshipment template. And again, the transshipment template is pretty well situated for this question. Just a couple quick changes to make is our plants go in column A. Our warehouses go across the top in the first section. And you'll notice as you change them in the first section, they automatically update in the second section. That's a benefit of using formulas. And then our retail outlets or across the top. Does everybody see where I am? Everybody at this point so far?
Yes.
So now we're going to fill in, and this section deals with our cost. Our shipping capacity is a constraint, and our constraints are identified in the solver. So all we're worried about at this step is just the cost. So our cost from plant 1 to warehouse 1, we're just going to copy the chart. And the same thing for our shipping costs from warehouse to retail outlets. And then our right-hand side is our output and demand requirements. So our output for plant 1 is 200 and 300 for plant 2. And then across the bottom, demand 150 for outlet 1, 200 for outlet 2, 150 for outlet 3. Now we go into our solver. And let's look at our solver setup. So our objective value is cell A14. That's listed as the total cost. And we want to minimize our cost. Our variable cells are our number of units shipped, and those are the yellow cells. Notice there's a row for plant 3, but because we don't actually use that plant, it's going to be zeros, so that we don't have to change anything there. Same thing as there's the C4 column. These are just additional columns that you could use if you had additional plants or retail outlets. But because they don't really change our solution, we don't have to change anything with those. Now our constraints, B11 is the amount that's shipped from warehouse 1, and that constraint is equal to K8, which is the amount received from the different retail outlets from warehouse 1. So those remind us of 2 additional constraints that the amount that warehouse 1 receives from the 2 plants has to be equal to the amount that it sends out. And the same for warehouse 2. Because our transshipment hubs can't retain any product. Everything that they receive, they have to turn back around and ship. So we'll go back to our solver. So those first 2 constraints are the transshipment constraints. Then our next constraint, D8 to D10, is referring to the total amount that is produced at our plants and G10 to J10 is our demand constraints. Our total demand has to be based on our retail outlet demands. Notice that the production demand is listed as a minimum demand, and our capacity demand is a maximum demand. Sorry, switch that. Production is maximum. Our production has to be less than our requirement, and our demand has to be greater than our required demand. We have 4 additional demands, and these correspond to our shipping capacity demands. So we need to add, and our shipping capacity demands refer to cells B8 to C9. So B8 is the shipment from plant 1 to warehouse 1. And that constraint is 125, right? Plant 1 has a shipping capacity of 125 to warehouse 1. Add another constraint for plant 1 to warehouse 2 is 150. Add a constraint for plant 2 to warehouse 1.
175.
Good. And plant 2, warehouse 2, 200. So you see, I just clicked add after each of them, and then I click OK on the last one, and it brings those over in here. So let's double check our constraints. And we've got our output constraints based on the values that we built into the chart, our demand constraints, our total transshipment. We made that constraint by the cell references in K8, K9, and B11 and C11. And our capacity constraints based on those 4 cells. Let's solve it. Keep our solver solution. And here's our solution. So we have 125 units being shipped from plant 1 to warehouse 1. And that's within its capacity. And we have 75 units from plant 1 to warehouse 2. And the total output from plant 1 is 200. Plant 2 ships 175 to warehouse 1 and 125 to warehouse 2 for total output of 300. We have warehouse 1 providing 150 units, all of the demand to retail outlet 1. 200 units come from warehouse 2 to retail outlet 2. And 150 units from warehouse 1 to retail outlet 3. Our total cost with this solution, $477,375. Did everybody see how we came up with that solution?
Hey, Trent, would you mind going back to the solver part of it?
Sure thing.
All right. So help me, I'm just trying to understand the area where it says by changing variable sales, right?
Yeah,
Can you kind of quickly walk? So those are formulated automatically, right? You don't put anything. Once you run the solver, it should pull it up.
that's right. That those are pre-generated based on the template. Those are the cells that are highlighted in yellow. So B8 is the units shipped from plant 1 to warehouse 1.
Okay.
Do you see where that corresponds on our Excel?
Yes.
And C10, even though we're not using those, that's plant 3 to warehouse 2. But since we have zeros in there, those end up not making any change to our solution. And then the G, H, I, J correspond to our warehouse to retail outlet variables.
I see it. Okay.
So again, column J we don't use. So you could get rid of the J8, J9, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference. So it's not incorrect to have it there.
Got
So
it.
because we use the template, those variable cells are automatically pre-populated. You don't have to change anything with those.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes.
So essentially, any cells that are colored, we should not be manually manipulating.
Exactly right.
Okay.
So we use the solver to find the optimal solution, and then we need to report the optimal solution. There's two ways that you can do it. The easiest way is to reuse sorry, I'm having to move files around my desktop. We can make a copy of our problem question. Maybe. And just make the changes. So this gives a visual representation of our solution. With this type of question, this is the best representation to use, because anybody who works in the transshipment industry would be able to look at this, look at the distribution network and the output and see how they're correlated. The other option you have is to manually type out the solution. And just fill that all in. So does everybody see how I got that? Are there any questions about question 2?
Can you
I'm
show
here-
the chart one more time?
Go ahead.
Can you show that chart one more time?
The diagram.
Yes.
And I'm here for you guys, so if I go too fast, please let me know. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to speak up.
Was that chart pulled? I came in a little bit late. Was that chart pulled or you created that chart?
We created this chart.
Okay.
It's basically just inserting shapes in a Word document. You don't have to do it in Word if it's easier for you to draw it out by hand and then take a picture or scan it in. You don't have to do this in Word is the main point, that this is
Thank
a technique, but not the required technique.
Thank you.
All right. With no more questions about question 2, we'll move on to the third question. And this is a question that we're given the reverse order. We're given the linear programming formula and are told to interpret the formula. So it's really testing that you understand how the linear programming formulas are created and being able to interpret the notation that somebody else has provided. I know this is kind of a advanced formula. When you look at it, it looks somewhat tricky, but when you break it down to the individual pieces, it'll start to come together in your head. And the best way to do it is just step by step, reading left to right and replacing the actual text from your notation with your variables. So for example, your very first variable in your minimize objective function is the sum I subset V1. V1, if you look at the notation at the top, is the set of production plants. So the first thing that we're identifying is that, similar to the transshipment product that question that we just finished, we're dealing with production out of a group of plants. V2, it says, is the set of potential DCs, P of which are to be opened. DCs are distribution centers. So looking back again at our transshipment question, those corresponded to our warehouses. V3, the third symbol in our objective function, R is a subset of V3. V3 is the demand points. In our transshipment problem, our demand points corresponded to our retail outlets. They're the points that have the ultimate demand. And then K, it says, is the set of homogeneous commodities or homogeneous commodities. So that is the commodities that are being created, our product. So the first four symbols in our objective function, the sigma corresponds to the sum of, so it's can also be considered as for all. So for all production plants, for all distribution centers, for all demand points, and for all commodities. So our major variables are our production plants, our distribution centers or warehouses, our demand points or our retail outlets, and our commodities, the product that we're dealing with. The next symbol in our objective function, C sub ijr to the k, is the next one in our notation. It says C ijr k is the unit transportation cost of commodity K from plant I to the demand point R across the DC J. So that's very wordy, but what that's saying, that's the transportation cost of shipping a commodity from our plant to the distribution center to the demand point. So C ijr to the k is our commodity shipping cost. The next variable in our objective function is S ijr to the k. That's the last variable in the notation, where S ijr k is the quantity of item K transported from plant I to demand point R through DCJ. So C is the cost, S is the commodity. So the first portion of our minimize function is looking at the cost of commodities shipped from our plants through our distribution centers to our demand point. So that whole first function breaks down to just how much does it cost to ship how many units. So we're minimizing our shipment costs. Does that make sense? Does everybody see how we got to that? So then break down the second half of the equation. The first sum, J subset V2, refers to the same potential decision point or distribution centers, P of which are to be opened. What that tells us is that we're trying to determine how many distribution centers do we need to have. Are we going to open one warehouse or 3 warehouses? How many do we need to minimize our cost? So for all of our distribution centers, that's the sum J subset V2. Then let's go inside the parentheses, F sub J, Z sub J. F sub J, go back to the notation, is the fixed cost of opening potential DCJ. So it's our fixed cost of opening a distribution center. And ZJ says is a binary variable equal to 1 if the DCJ is opened or 0 otherwise. So because we don't know how many distribution centers we're going to need, this is looking at the fixed cost of any decision or distribution center that we open. Then the second half of that equation, the G sub J is the marginal cost of operating the distribution center J. So there's so far 2 costs with having a distribution center. We've got the cost of opening the decision center or distribution center, how much it costs to actually just go out and buy the property, and then the cost of operating the distribution center. So G sub J is the marginal cost. We've got 2 sums again talking about the V3 demand points and K the commodities. D sub R K, back in the notation, is the quantity of product K required by demand point R. So we said demand point is the same thing as our retail outlet. So how many of each commodity is being required at a demand point? And then YJR is the binary variable equal to 1 if demand point R is assigned to DCJ, 0 otherwise. So it's again a 1-0 true false. Does a specific distribution center supply to our demand point? So G sub J, some distribution centers, some commodities. So for all commodities distributed by the distribution centers, it's the cost of operating the distribution center for that supplies the demand point. can you guys, if I highlight, well, it won't let me highlight. Never mind. Okay. Answer my own question. So let's break out again that second half. So for all distribution centers, the sum J subset V2, we're trying to minimize the first part of the equation is the cost of opening the distribution center. And the second part of that equation is the cost of operating the distribution centers as they're assigned to the demand points for specific commodities, specific products. So our total objective function is to minimize the unit transportation cost required to ship items from our plants to our retail outlets through our distribution centers, plus minimize the cost of running, of opening and running those distribution centers. So our total objective function is to minimize our transportation costs and our operating costs. So question A, what is to be minimized and what is the meaning of each term in the objective function? We're minimizing our transportation costs and our operating costs. And then the terms are C IJR to the K is the transportation costs of commodities from our plants to the distribution centers and then ultimately to our retail outlets. Our S IJR to the K is the quantity being transported. The second part of the question, the FJZJ, is the opening costs for our distribution centers. And the GJ, DRK, YJR is the operating cost of our distribution centers. So does everybody understand the objective function? Do you see how I interpreted that scenario?
Can you go over it one more time? I'm sorry.
Sure. So from left to right, we're going to break our equation into two halves. Break at the first plus sign. So the left half of the equation, the sigma I subset V1, JV2, RV3, K subset K. That's just telling us that it's looking at every individual unit. The C IJR to the K is we go back up to the notation and just read directly out of the notation, the unit transportation cost of commodity K from plant I to the demand point R across the DCJ. DC is distribution center, which in our transshipment question, the second question that we just did, corresponds to our warehouse. And the demand point corresponds to our retail outlets. So CIJR to the K is the unit cost of shipping our product from our plant to the warehouse and then ultimately to the retail outlet. And then the next part of that equation, the SIJR to the K, the last step in the notation is the quantity of item K transported from plant I. So CIJR is the unit transportation cost per unit. The SIJR is the number of units being transported. Do you see how those two correspond?
Yes, thank you.
So that means that the first half of that equation is that we're trying to minimize the unit transportation cost of the commodities that are being shipped. And then the second half of the equation, starting with the sigma j v2, fjzj, f sub j says that it's the fixed cost of opening the potential distribution center J. So we said early on in the notation for V2, the set of potential DCs, P of which are to be opened, tells us that we're going to be opening a certain number of distribution centers. We don't know how many, but for each distribution center that we open, there's a cost associated with opening that distribution center. And that's the FJZJ. Then the second half of that equation, the GJ, DRK, YJR, the GJ is the marginal cost of operating the distribution centers. And that's based on the DRK, which is the quantity of product required at a specific demand point, and YJR, which is whether our distribution center services a specific demand point. What that means is that for each distribution center that we open, we have the fixed cost of opening the distribution center, as well as the variable cost of operating the distribution centers based on the demand points that they're supplying. So the two parts of our objective function are minimizing the unit transportation cost, and then the second part is minimizing our opening and operating cost of our distribution centers.
So Trent, the way that this needs to be answered, question A, right, is what is to be minimized and what is the meaning of each term in the objective function means what you just laid out, but then we also need to explain each term, what does it mean, correct?
Right, and each term is, you can look at it as really being three main terms. Your first term is the first set, the sigma IV1, sigma JV2, RV3, CIJR. So you're explaining in that one what the CIJR and the SIJR. In the second part, you're explaining the FJZJ. What does that term mean? And then the third part, what does the GJ, DKR, YJR, how does that break down?
Got it. Thank you.
All right, so section B says to explain the 5 constraints and why these limitations are considered. And we'll go through these one at a time as well. So our first constraint JV2 RV3 tells us we're looking at the distribution centers and the demand points. SIJRK is the quantity of K transported from plant I to demand point R. So that's the quantity shipped is less than or equal to PIK, which in our notation says PIK is the maximum quantity of product K that plant I can produce. So that first constraint says that the amount that we ship has to be less than or equal to the amount that we produce. Make sense?
Yeah, this one is much easier to understand. The
That's
first one
yeah.
was a little difficult.
Once we break down into the, and when you see the constraints, it might help you, once you understand the constraints, to go back and look again at the objective function. So we'll go on to the next constraint. The SIJRK is the same thing. It's the quantity required equals DRK YJR. So DRK is the quantity of product K required by demand point R, and YJR is the binary variable equal to 1 if a demand point R is assigned to DCJ or 0 otherwise. So because not every distribution center will service every demand point, what this is saying is that the quantity transported has to be equal to the quantity demanded. So if we're shipping from a distribution center to a demand point, the amount we ship has to equal our demand. So does that make sense for the second constraint? And same thing, when you look at break it down into smaller pieces, makes it more manageable and makes it easier to understand. So let's look at our third constraint. Sum J subset V2 YJR equals 1. Well, J V2 is the distribution centers, and YJR is the binary variable equal to 1 if the demand point R is assigned to distribution center J. And R is a subset of V3, so R is the demand points. What this is saying is that every demand point has to be assigned to one distribution center. So each distribution center or each demand point can only be supplied by a single distribution center. Now, that doesn't mean that a single distribution center can't supply multiple demand points, but every demand point can only receive its supply from a single distribution center. Everybody understand that constraint? And see how we interpreted it?
Trent, the V2 is a potential distribution center that could be open, right? Or that might, that would be open.
That's right.
So how do you, I'm little, I guess I'm not understanding, since it is to be open, how do you interpret that for that particular third one that you're talking about?
Because we have a known number of demand points, we don't have a known number of distribution centers. Each demand point has to be, can only be supplied by a single distribution center. But since multiple distribution centers can service, or excuse me, a single distribution center can service multiple demand points, we don't have a one-for-one relationship. It's not that a single distribution center can only service a single demand point. It's we need to open enough distribution centers that all of our demand points can be serviced. Does that help?
I'm still trying to figure it out.
Let me see if I can think of another way.
So the first part, right? So your sum of J's V2 go back to the before the equal to one part. How do you, what is the definition of that?
Okay, so the YJR is the binary variable demand equal to 1 if the demand point R is assigned to DCJ. So let's use our variables from our second question as an example. So our distribution centers are our warehouses, and our demand points are our retail outlets. So in question 2, every warehouse could service every retail outlet, and every retail outlet could receive supply from any combination of warehouses. So we had 2 warehouses and 3 retail outlets. So if we say DC, if J is going to correspond to 1 or 2, warehouse 1 or warehouse 2. And R is going to correspond to RO1, RO2, RO3. So warehouse 1, retail outlet 1, the value for that will be 1 if warehouse 1 services retail outlet 1. Warehouse 1 does not service retail outlet 1, then the value is going to be 0.
Got it, clear, thank you.
So YJR is, as we're opening distribution centers, are they servicing specific retail outlets? Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yes, actually, that last part that you said, now it did make sense, because if it is services, then and the value equal to 1, that makes sense. If it doesn't, then it's 0. So the 0 part was what I was missing. So I got it.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. Good. Anybody else have questions with that one? That one is one of the trickier ones, just because of the way that it's laid out. So moving on to the fourth constraint, G sub j negative Z sub j is less than or equal to D sub r k y j r is less than or equal to G sub j positive Z sub j. And in our notation, Q sub j negative is the minimum activity level of distribution center J, and Q positive J is the maximum activity level. D sub kr is the quantity required by demand point R, and YJR is back to our binary 1 or 0 if the distribution center supplies the demand point. So D sub r k y j r breaks down into the activity level for the distribution center. It's how much of the commodity does this distribution center distribute to demand points? And there's constraints on activity level. There's a minimum activity level that has to be at least that amount, and then there's a maximum level that it cannot exceed. So it's just saying that for the distribution centers, there's a requirement to a minimum and maximum of how much it can distribute to the different demand points. So this is our shipping constraints. If it can only ship 150 units from warehouse 1 to retail outlet 1, or it has to ship at least 150 units, but not more than 200 units. So that fourth constraint is just our shipping constraint for our distribution centers. Requires our distribution centers to fall within a certain activity level range. And then the last one that she asks for explanation is 36. And 36, 37, and 38 are all similar to our non-negativity constraints that we had in our original linear programming functions. Z sub j is a subset of 0 or 1. Basically means that Z, it's limited to 0 or 1, and J is a subset of V2. V2 is the distribution centers. So it's identifying which decision centers are opened. So for warehouse 1, if J equals warehouse 1, Z is going to be either 0 or 1. And the next one, the YJR, is the demand point R to DCJ. And she didn't ask for explanation on that one, but it's the same thing of, does the demand point supply the distribution center? Switch that. Does the distribution center supply the demand point? So I think her thought process was, if you can explain 36, then 37 and 38 are similar, and 38 is actually there. That's the non-negativity, that the quantity shipped has to be greater than 0.
And there's going to be a problem like this on our exam 1?
Not necessarily this detailed.
Okay.
This is harder than anything that you're going to see on the exam, for sure.
Okay, good.
So let's make sure we've got the full question answered. All right, so A, what is minimized in the term of the objective function? We're minimizing the transportation cost of commodities from plants to distribution centers to warehouses, and the cost of opening and operating our distribution centers. Our 5 constraints. The first constraint is our production constraint for our capacity, that we have to ship everything that we produce. Second constraint is we have to ship what we need. Question or
Are you on question B?
yes.
Okay.
So 34 is each demand point must be serviced by a single distribution center. $35 is our activity constraint. We have minimum and maximum activity levels for every distribution center. And 36 is our distribution centers are opened as needed, basically. And you can explain why those limitations are considered. And then section C is overall state the decision problem considered in this mathematical programming. What are we trying to accomplish? Can anybody answer that?
We're trying to minimize the cost.
The cost of what?
Good point.
So the decision problem is what's the question that this objective function is trying to solve?
Would it be the least amount of DC centers that are needed to transport from plants to retail outlets?
It's how many are, right?
Yeah.
Yep. How many distribution centers do we need to distribute our product from our plants to our retail outlets? And we know how many we need to open by minimizing the cost of transportation plus the cost of running the distribution centers. How's everybody feel about that question?
Okay.
So it looks nasty when you first look at it, but breaking it down into little pieces, evaluating the individual terms, and then putting them all together is the best way to approach one of these questions. So does anybody else have any questions about question number 3?
Kind of lost.
Okay. What part are you lost on, or what do you understand so far?
Maybe actually I'll have to I'll have to preview the video like you're recording. I don't
Okay.
want much of your time.
Okay. So I anticipate this session will last until about 5. I do have plans this evening, but should be done by about 9. So if anybody has any questions, I may be back after 9 to answer emails, and could potentially do some additional assistance after 9.
How long will it take for the video to upload? Will we have it immediately after the session?
Yeah, I'll have it as soon as I get the session complete.
Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else? All right, then we'll go ahead and move on to question 4. And this is an analysis question. Requires very little actual calculations on your part. It's basically just analyzing the output that's been presented to you. So question 4 talks about a textile mill producing 5 different fabrics on 2 different machines, the doughy and regular looms. The products can be produced on either of the 2 looms or can be purchased. And what the plant can't produce, it will have to purchase. But they're also trying to maximize the profit. And we're given our notation where X and R is the fabrics on regular looms, and we've got the fabrics on doughy looms, and then Y is fabrics that are purchased. And we're trying to maximize our profit. Our profits are in our table. It's the selling price minus either the production cost or the purchase price, depending on whether it's produced or purchased. And it's based on fabric and loom. So 0.61 x 3R corresponds to 61% profit for fabric produced on regular looms for fabric 3. So it's maximizing a profit per item. Profit for X3R, 4R, 5R, those are the only three that are produced on regular looms, plus the profit for our 5 Dobie looms, plus the fabric, or the profit for fabric purchased. So one thing to note is our objective coefficient ends at Y4. Because if you look back at Y5 is yards of fabric 5 purchased. And in our main question, the purchase price of fabric 5 is 70 cents and our sales price is 70 cents. So if we purchase any of product 5, we make 0 profit. So in our objective coefficient, or our objective equation, you can consider it as plus 0 Y5. And that comes into play later when we're looking at our output. In our constraints, we're told how many hours we have available for each of our machines. So the 0.1912 X3R, that is the regular yards per hour. And the 21600 tells us this comes from this section. Can you guys see when I highlight? I just highlighted the mill has a total of 38 looms, 8 are Dobie and 30 are regular.
Yes.
You can see that highlight.
Yes.
And the mill operates for 24 hours a day for 30 days. So our total hours of Dobie available is 24 hours times 30 days times 8 looms. So that's our 5760. And then 21600 is the hours available for regular looms. And the next section is our demand constraints. Our demand for fabric 1 is 16,500. Demand for fabric 2, 22,000, and so forth. And then we get into our solution. Our optimal objective value is the answer to our objective function. So our maximum value saying is 62,531. And the way we come to that solution is through our variables. X3R, we said, was the amount produced on regular looms for fabric 3. And we produce 27,707.80815. So this first section is telling us what our production rate looks like, or what our production schedule is. how much we're producing on our regular looms, Adobe looms, and how much we're purchasing. So we're not producing any of fabric 3, 4, or 5 on our Adobe looms, and we're not purchasing any of fabric 2, 4, or 5. We're producing 4,668 yards of fabric 1 on our Adobe looms and purchasing 11,831 yards of fabric 1. Fabric 3, we're producing 27,707 on our regular looms and purchasing 34,292. So the second section of our solution is our production schedule. So who can tell me what this next section, constraint, slack surplus, dual value, what does this section correspond to? What information are we seeing in this section?
Shadow price.
That's right. So for our 7 constraints, and we can go back up to the top, and here it might be helpful to just in your notes, write the numbers next to your constraint. Constraint 1 is the regular hours available. Constraint 2 is Adobe hours available. Constraint 3 is demand constraint for fabric 1. Constraint 4 is demand constraint for fabric 2. And 5, 6, and 7 are fabrics 3, 4, 5. So a shadow price or dual value is also known as the extra profit generated by one more unit available of that constraint. So for our capacity constraints for 1 and 2, that's how much more would 1 hour of production be worth. So 1 is on regular looms, 2 is on Adobe. And then constraints 3 through 7, how much more is 1 unit of fabric worth? So for example, 1 more unit of fabric of constraint 3, which corresponds with fabric number 1, would generate 19 cents of profit. So the next section, the objective coefficient, allowable increase and decrease. This tells us how much our amounts can change, how much variability we have in our coefficients. And these correspond with our objective function coefficients. So your 0.61 x3r is your first coefficient. 0.61, allowable increase and decrease. So these are our profit from each of our units. And here's where you see the 0. This is our 0 for Y5, where the Y5 has the profit from selling Y5 is the same as the amount it costs to buy fabric 5. So the objective coefficient there is 0. And the decrease for that is infinite, because no matter how much we decrease for selling purchased product, let's see, let me pause that. Decreasing the profit that we get from selling that product is not going to change the amount that we can improve, because we're already not making any profit from that product. But if we increase the amount of profit that we generate, then it's going to change our objective function, and we're going to have to recalculate our solution up to, or if we increase over 6 cents. So this section is telling us how flexible our profit values are. And then the last section is at the flexibility of our constraints. The first two being our capacity constraints, and the last 5 being our demand constraints. So for question A, the optimal production schedule and loom assignments for each fabric, we're looking at our objective function and our objective solution. So that's this second section of the answer. This is telling us that we're producing 27,707 units of fabric on X3R, units of fabric 3 on regular looms, and you just go down and list out the production schedule. So you can say fabric 1 will have 4,668 units produced on Dobie looms and 11,831 yards purchased. Fabric 2 is going to have 22,000 units produced on Dobie looms. Fabric 3 is going to have 27,707 units produced on regular looms and 34,292 units purchased. Fabric 4 is going to have 75,000 units produced on regular looms, and fabric 5 is going to have 62,000 produced on regular looms. So everybody see where in our solution we're figuring the optimal production schedule. So B, how many yards of each fabric must be purchased from another mill? So I just included that in my description of A. So For A, you can tell how much is produced and just stick with the top numbers. And for B, how much is purchased, just stick with the bottom numbers. So that's the first two questions. Any questions about those two? Everybody see where we're getting those answers?
Repeat that again, please.
Yep. So question A is the optimal production schedule and loom assignments for each fabric. So that's our regular Adobe production. And we're not producing any fabrics 3, 4, and 5 on Adobe looms. We're only producing those on regular looms. And fabrics 1 and 2 are being produced on Adobe looms. And then B is how much of each fabric is being purchased. And that's our Y variable values. We're purchasing 11,831 yards of fabric 1 and 34,292 yards of fabric 3. And then question C, what is the maximum profit attainable with the suggested production schedule? That's just our objective value. That's the 62,531.49. So that's saying that our maximum profit is $62,531.49 based on this production schedule. Everybody see where I got that? Okay, question D. What's the purchase price of fabric 3, or if the purchase price of fabric 3 is increased by 10 cents, would the optimal solution change? So that's looking at Y3, because we're purchasing fabric 3, not producing fabric 3. So let's go back up and look at our allowable increase for purchasing fabric 3. And here it might help to work backwards. We've got 5 is our bottom one, 4, 3, 2, 1. So fabric 3, our objective coefficient is 50 cents. Our allowable increase is 11 cents. Our allowable decrease is 1 cent. So the question asks, if the purchase price is increased by 10 cents, would the optimal solution change? Well, 10 cents is less than 11 cents, so it's within the allowable increase. So that does not change the optimal solution. So a similar question is if the purchase price of fabric 4 increased by 10 cents, would the optimal solution change? Can anybody answer that? It would?
Yes.
And what would the limit be?
It can only increase to 8 cents.
Very good. It increased by 8 cents. So it's currently 54 cents. So it could increase up to 62 cents. It's an increase by 8 cents. That makes sense?
Yes.
You see the difference? So question E, if the mill increased the selling price of fabric 2 on Dobie looms to $1, would the production schedule change? How much change in profit would you expect? So question E, let's look at, we're looking at fabric 2 on Dobie looms being increased to $1. So what is our current selling price for fabric 2 on Dobie looms?
Is it 31 cents?
So here we go. We're looking at the X3D. X3D currently 61 cents. Do you see where I found that? No.
It's fabric 2.
Oh, thank you. Fabric 2. 31 cents. Yep, you're right. Good catch. Thank you. And so our values for X2D, go back to our objective coefficient, and it's here, our 0.31. It says the allowable increase is infinite and the allowable decrease is 1 cent. So if the selling price increased to $1, would the production schedule change? So because our allowable increase is infinite, we'll go back up and look again real quick. So our production, or our profit from unit 2 is selling price is 86 cents, production cost is 55 cents, so our profit is 31 cents. That's where we got the value for our objective coefficient. So if our profit increased from, or if our selling price increased from 86 cents to $1, how much does that change?
$0.14.
14 cents. So it's within our allowable increase. So that means our production schedule won't change, but then how much profit or how much change in profit will we expect? So now we have to go back and look at how many units we produced and how much additional profit we're getting from those units. So fabric 2 on Dobie looms, we produced 22,000 units. So if we produce 22,000 units and have an additional 14 cents per unit profit, what's our total change in profit?
$3,080.
Perfect. Everybody see where that comes from? So because we fell within the range of feasibility for our objective coefficient, our production schedule stays the same. So we're still producing 22,000 units, but our objective value, our total profit, is going to increase by 14 cents per unit produced. So our total profit's going to increase by $3,080. So question F and G are asking about how much it's worth for an extra hour of regular or Adobe. And those correspond with an increase in our objective constraints. So initially we have 21,600 hours of regular available and 5,760 hours of Adobe. These are our constraints, constraint 1 and 2. Our dual value is the amount of one additional unit of the constraint. So for one regular hour, we would have an increase of 57 cents. And for one increase in Adobe hours would be 0.64820. So go ahead and put all 5 digits after the decimal since that's what you're given. So question F, how much is it worth for one extra Adobe hour? Is the dual value for constraint 1. And for G, the extra for Adobe hour is constraint 2, dual value. Everybody see that? So those two are just report the numbers that you see. Question H, what's the maximum value of the 9th Adobe loom? How much should they be willing to pay for an additional Adobe loom? So we have 8 Adobe looms. If we have one more Adobe loom, how many production hours would we get from that? We're running 24 hours a day for 30 days. So we'd get 720 production hours. So one more Adobe loom gives us an additional 720 production hours. And we look to see if that's within our range of feasibility. So our production hours for Adobe looms, we currently have 5,760. Our range of feasibility, we can increase an additional 250 or 2,555. So our 720 is within our range of feasibility. So we can increase that value without changing our objective function. So we're not changing our objective or our production schedule. And our profit per unit of additional hour for Adobe is 0.64820. So because we're within our objective constraint, we're not having to recalculate, then one additional machine is going to give 720 hours times our dual value. So anybody 720 times 0.6482?
$466.7.
Yep. So $466.70 is the maximum they should pay for an additional Adobe Loom, because that's how much they'd make based on having that extra loom. So that's one of the more in-depth calculations. Does everybody see how we came to that number? See the different steps that we took to get there. So we first have to see how much that constraint can change without changing our optimal solution. And as long as it's within that range of feasibility, then how much each additional unit is worth. So 720 units of production for Adobe Looms would give us $466.70 worth of profit.
Hey, Trent, can you go back to how we got that 720 hours,
Yep.
additional hours?
So we're running our factory 24 hours a day for 30 days.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes. So we have 30 regular looms. If we add one more regular loom, how much should we be willing to pay? Can somebody walk me through how to get that answer?
So would it be the 720 times 0.575?
It would. And the first thing to check though is it within the feasible range? So the first thing we have to look at is this number. We currently have 21,600 regular hours available. Our 720 is within the allowable increase, so it does not change our solution. So then our 720 times our dual value tells us the value of one additional regular loom. All right. Question I, management would like to understand the effects of different demand levels for different fabrics on the optimal solution and the total profit.
Oh, you know, this is now.
What was that? Then discuss the range of feasibility and the value of extra demand for each fabric. So we're looking at the range of feasibility for our fabrics is the second group. So fabric 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fabric 1, currently our demand is 16,500. It has an infinite increase. That tells us that our demand for fabric 1 can increase no matter how much the demand increases, our feasible solution will never change. But if it decreases by 11,831 or more than 11,831, then our optimal solution change.
So do we have to write this in the formulas like she showed us during the lecture, or can we just write it out like the way you just said it?
This one you can just write it as if you're presenting something to your manager. So
Okay.
you're write it out in an explanation form saying, you know, this is our current demand for this product. Our demand, if our demand changes by a certain amount, you know, what amount can it change by, and what effects will those changes have? And the effects are the dual values of your constraints. So, for example, just looking at the first one, we currently have 16,500 units of fabric 1. If our demand increased for every additional unit, we would receive 19 cents extra profit. There's no limit on how much we can increase our demand to, but if our demand decreases by more than 11,831.2, then our 19-cent value will have to be recalculated. So you're referring to the range of feasibility in this last section to discuss your demand levels, and your dual value to discuss how those change your profit.
So the answer has to be each of them individually, right?
That's right. So you're going to talk about all 5 pieces, all 5 different types of fabric. Tell what the demand is, the flexibility of the demand, the effective profit on the extra demand.
So is that saying that if the current value decreased by more than the 11,831, then any unit beyond that would be a deficit of 19 cents?
It's any unit up to that amount would be a deficit of 19 cents.
Okay.
Beyond that, we would have to recalculate. It would change our objective function, therefore changing our dual values. So the outside, anything above your allowable increase or below your allowable decrease is going to change your profit schedule. But as long as you fall within the feasibility range, then each additional or less unit is going to adjust your profit by the dual value.
Okay.
So that also leads into question J. If the company has to choose only one fabric to promote by additional advertisement, which fabric should they choose and why? So if they promote something, it's going to increase the demand, and which fabric has the largest impact on profit based on a unit change of demand. So we're looking at the dual value of our constraints and which demand would have, or which increase in demand would have the biggest impact on profit. So
Would it,
go ahead.
I was going to say, would it be 3, fabric 3?
So let's count down 1, 2, 3. Fabric 3 has a dual value of 50,000 or of 50 cents. Fabric 4 has a dual value of 62 cents.
So fabric 6.
Fabric 5 has a dual value of 6 cents.
Fabric 6.
Constraint 6, which corresponds to fabric 4. Because remember, these constraint numbers 1 through 7 correspond to how the constraints are laid out in your objective function. So constraint 6 corresponds with fabric 4.
Okay, so we're not multiplying these by the values.
No, you're just looking at the value, saying which one has the
highest dual value. Okay, I was multiplying it by that, the values above there, the variable values. Okay.
Yep. So an increase in demand for fabric 5 by 1 unit would give us 6 cents extra profit, but an increase in demand for fabric 4 would have an increase in 62 cents profit. So fabric 4 is our most profitable based on demand.
Which is constraint 6.
Correct.
Thank you.
So this is where it might be helpful next to this 1 through 7 just write out constraint 1, regular capacity, constraint 2, Dobie capacity, constraint 3, fabric 1, constraint 4, fabric 2. Just anywhere you see those, and then do the same thing down here with your right-hand side values. These are your constraints 1 through 7. And your objective coefficients, these all correspond with your X3R Y5s. So just writing the numbers, transposing them from one section to another will help you keep track in your mind of what corresponds to what. So that was J. If they promote one, which should they choose and why? They should choose fabric 4 because it has the highest dual value, or the highest additional profit per unit. Any questions about that so far? All right, questions K and L both talk about changing multiple factors. Question K, if the selling price for fabric 4 increased by 5 cents, would the optimal solution change? Well, if the selling price for fabric 4 increased, that affects fabric 4 produced on Dobie looms, fabric 4 produced on regular looms, and purchased fabric 4. So it's affecting 3 different objective constraints. So this is where we have to use the 100% rule. That's where if the change of each, if the percent change of each constraint totals less than 100%, then you can make all 3 changes at the same time without affecting your optimal solution. But if you go over 100%, it's going to change your optimal solution and you'll have to recalculate. So let's look at X4R. X4R corresponds to the 0.73 objective coefficient. So we're looking at this one here. And the allowable increase for X4R is infinite. So this one, when there's an infinite allowable increase, you know that any change is allowable. So that isn't going to come into any, it is not going to affect our optimal solution. So far, we're good. The next one is X4D. And that one's going to correspond to this 73. And here, our allowable increase is 1 cent. So we're outside of our feasible range for this one. We're already over 100% change. Therefore, we know this is going to affect our optimal solution. But just while we're at it, let's look at Y4. Y4 corresponds to our 54-cent objective coefficient. So Y4 is an allowable increase of 8 cents. So here's where you would calculate. So a 5-cent increase over 8 cents is 62% change. There is 62% of our allowable increase. So if our X4D if the change in our X4D was less than 38%, we could make those two changes at the same time without affecting our optimal solution. But because we're already over on the X4D, then our selling price would change the optimal solution, and the optimal total cost would have to be recalculated. So here, you don't have to calculate what that cost would be, just that the optimal solution would change, so the optimal cost would have to be recalculated. So does everybody see how section K fails the 100% rule? Now let's look at question L and see if that one works with 100%. So we're increasing regular hours to 2,500, or excuse me, 25,000, and Adobe hours to 6,000. So we currently have 21,600 hours of regular available. We want to increase to 25,000. That's a 3,400 increase. That's within our range of feasibility. So 3,400 divided by 6556.8244. We'll go ahead and take it all the way out the decimals that we have. And that's 51.8%. So that's an increase of 52%. Then our Adobe hours are increasing to 6,000. They're currently 5,760. They can increase 2,555. So increasing from 5,760 to 6,000 is a 240-point increase, which is within the range of feasibility. So 240 divided by 2,555.33477 is 9.4%. So our first increase was 52%. Our second increase is 9.4%. That's less than 100%. So those two can change without affecting our optimal solution. So the second part, will there be any savings or total cost increases? Well, it's within our range of feasibility for both options. So let's calculate based on our dual values. So we're increasing Dobie by 3,400 at a dual value of 0.575. And we're increasing, increasing regular by 3,400, increasing Dobie by 240 with a dual value of 0.648. So our profit is going to increase 5,753 times 3,400. So we're making an extra 1,956.02 out of our regular looms, and 240 times 0.6482, and $155.57 out of our Dobie looms. So it does not change our optimal solution. It increases our profit by that total amount.
So I'm sorry. The second part is 240 by times 6,482.
Is 240 times 0.6482.
Okay, that's fine. Okay.
How did you get a one? How did you get a 155 again, please?
240 times 0.6482. So it's the increase in Dobie hours times the dual price for Dobie. So question K fails the 100% rule. Question L passes the 100% rule. So that's question 4. Are there any questions about that? Does anybody need me to go over anything again? And this recording will be available, so feel free to watch it again. And again, I'll be available again after 9 tonight. So if you have questions, you can email them to me and I can get back to you this evening.
And you say the recorder would be under modules?
I will post an announcement of where it is. I haven't posted one before, so it may just be in its own announcement. But I'll explain in my announcement where to find those links.
And it'd be both of them, both question 1 and then the other one.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
I really appreciate your help.
Absolutely. Very glad to help.
Hey Trent,
Yes.
quick question. So when some of these are like simple math, right? Just to do it in Excel, like the one you did on a calculator.
Yep.
So should we just do that in a kind of like a tap to tap for each question, or 1, 2 on the Excel side, do your math, calculate, and submit that at the same time when you're actually explaining your answers on the Word document? Is that how it should be done?
For the simple calculations,
Mhm.
you can just have that in your written response in the Word document. Just,
Okay.
For that one, you're showing the equation, the calculation for your 100% rule, that it's within the 100%, therefore it does not change the optimal solution, but it increases your profit by, and show the amounts.
Got it.
You don't necessarily have to have a full Excel spreadsheet for these.
Okay. As long as we can kind of show the link of how we got to that point, that's what you need, whether it's, a doctor.
That's right. Show me how you got the answer, not just, yep,
Just say, this is what it's supposed to be. Okay, got it.
exactly right. Thank you.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, quick question. So, for homework 1, if it's already graded, I have a comment that says like see notes in file. So where am I going to actually see the feedback from where it was graded? Because I wanted to kind of like go back and try and redo them again before exam 1.
Sure. You should be able to go to open the file that you submitted.
Mm-hmm.
Just download that file, and the notes should be as comments in that file.
Hmm.
I'm going to go ahead and pause, stop the recording, but we'll keep talking